Welcome to Mo's Market Pulse. I'm your host, Sara Mokaram, founder of Mo Digital Solutions, where we help businesses hit their revenue goals and thrive. On this podcast, we talk with industry leaders about their business, market trends, growth strategies, and what's ahead. On today's episode, we are joined by Greg Ruffino, sales manager at Interprose. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, your story, of course, matters. And before we kind of dive into that, I would love to just learn about what Interpros does, what you offer. So, if you could just give us a little bit of background about the company and what you provide.
Absolutely. So Interprose as a company has actually been around since the late 80s, and it started out as a data mapping company, but quickly progressed as it continued to add new tools and features to a full-on debt collection platform. A lot of people's favorite two words to hear put together, debt collection, right? But what Interprose does is it has a software we call ACE, and it is a cloud hosted solution on Amazon Web Services. And our kind of main company demographics could be collection agencies, governments, banks, financial institutions, entities that need assistance in recovering their money, their revenues, or outsourcing it for others to recover that money as well. So we provide a modern platform with a lot of integrated digital communication outreach solutions and self-service payment portals and all kinds of new fun stuff I'm sure we'll get into that help make the job easier. And when I say easier, that means for all parties involved, not just for the actual agency performing the collection work, but also very importantly for the consumer themselves, right? How to help the consumer be communicated in ways that are convenient for them and provide solutions to them as well that are efficient and kind of seamless.
Perfect. And now, can you walk us through your journey from the collections agency side into SaaS and how those experiences really shaped, the way that you approach sales and client relationships now?
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to 2010, getting into the adult life, need some adult turn in my career trajectory. I was very much into the restaurant management world, and those hours and that work life balance were not very ideal. So I knew one person who worked as a collection agent, and at that point in time in 2010, I thankfully knew very little to nothing about the big ugly world of debt collection. But he kind of told me like, hey, this is a call center job with these great opportunities and companies. So I gave it a shot. And like myself, many people enter into that industry. Let's just say you don't really go to college to learn how to be in the account receivable business. Most that I know over the years kind of fall into it, or maybe it was a family line of business, or you just had that one person or family member you knew that was doing that line of work and they kind of fall into it. That line of work doesn't really necessarily require specific college degrees, and oftentimes doesn't per se require prior experience, depending on who's doing the hiring. So I started doing that in 2010, and within about 3 years, I had made some really nice progressions into like the team leadership side, and then eventually a director role in 2014 to be the director of training. This company was growing very much, and we got to a point where we were right around 400 full-time employees at this company. So that need for bringing in new agents and having a more robust training program is the niche that I kind of filled in. I did that all the way up until the summer of 2023. Had incredible experience with that agency. And kind of at that point in time, it was, what's next in the progression and opportunity. And of course, with the pandemic and a lot of people getting some work from home opportunities, I kind of saw an outlet for that as well. And I'm sure we can get into how I came across Interpros, which was essentially for me spending a lot of time and years attending industry conventions and trade shows and getting to know some of the folks on the vendor side. So when it came time to think about what's that next career shift, there was that 50-50. Do I want to leave an industry I've spent, 13 years building relationships and expertise in, or do I want to find a way to make a pivot within that industry? And fortunately, through some networks and connections, I came across the opportunity at Interpros to be on the other side of the aisle, the vendor and solutions side of that, right? So going to these trade shows and conventions, You have the agencies and those who are doing the work of debt collection, and on the other side, you have those that are providing the solutions and the software and the different services. So you get to kind of meet each other over those events, and you can vet each other and vet the product and the people and the companies. And thankfully, I made some good connections. And a little over 2 years ago, I found myself in a brand new role selling software.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. And that is, it does make sense though, right? Because you were still immersed in the collections industry. And now it's just, and I feel like the best salespeople are those who actually have that experience. So that makes
Yeah,
sense with
and
that transition.
yeah, and truth be told, when we were discussing the potential opportunity to move into a software sales job, right? That's very high level tech stuff is involved in how all these systems connect and how the back offices work. And truth be told, even to this day, that's not necessarily my area of expertise, but the angle that we really thought through was knowing the operations side, right? And knowing that I would be speaking with folks who were on that agency operations side that I used to be so entrenched with. So when they're talking shop, that's like a second language to me. When they're, going through their current headaches and problems and what their future goals are, it's really well suited for me to talk about how they conduct business and their specific processes and workflows. And that's kind of where I help connect the dots. The agency operators come to us and say, "Hey, we have these problems and headaches. We are in need of these solutions. We're looking to modernize." And beyond the tech heavy level side of that conversation, you really get into figuring out the best case scenarios of how, our software and other software can help them achieve their goals.
So now that we have some context of your journey and about the company, I'd like to zoom out a little bit about the collections industry and just talk a little bit about, the different changes it's going through with regulatory shifts, technology adoption, as well as consumer expectations. So, from your perspective, what are the biggest changes happening in the credit and collections industry right now? And how are those shifts influencing how Interpro positions itself?
Yeah, so just a few years ago, there was some major regulatory change, and just like any big business, right? You're constantly dealing with a deluge of new and upcoming regulations and laws, and sometimes they go through, sometimes they don't. There's also a very kind of obvious political shifts as different administrations come and go. They have different objectives. One wants to scale up, the next one comes in and they want to scale down. So it's very much a moving target. And you also get into blanket federal laws that are, supposed to hit everyone in every state. And then beyond that, in each 50 states, they have the right to make their own laws and regulations that go beyond what the federal guidelines are. So I used to teach, it's called the FDCPA, that's known as the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act. And I'm going to watch this recording and say, I can't believe I don't recall when that law was made, but it was somewhere around 19, I could be off 1 or 2 years. But think about the late 60s when that FDCPA came out in an attempt to lay a level playing field for all agencies and consumers involved in that process. And in the late 70s, what did we not have? We didn't have email. We didn't have text messages. We didn't have the internet and online payment portals and things like that. The industry was essentially a phone call, a paper letter in your mailbox, and in some cases back in the day, a knock on the door. So as these years progressed and as these new tools came to our disposal, those laws never really covered that new functionality, right? So there's a lot of gray area for many years for agencies to try to operate in as far as how they should be proceeding. For those that are trying to act in good faith and abide by the laws, how do we have an email policy? How do we have a text message policy when there's nothing in those laws written in the late 70s? And as a great example, harassment, right? Under the FDCPA, it says a consumer can sue a collection agencies under the guise of "you're harassing me." But the problem there is that there is no definition of harassment. There's no black and white to it. Harassment is actually defined by that consumer. You called me while I was at work. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were at work. Well, you're harassing me. So now I'm going to present a lawsuit, right? So at some point, the CFPB CFPB was created. I think that came after the big financial crash in the 2008 timeframe, where the CFPB came out with a whole new set of guidelines and rules and created a whole new bureau under the federal government. And one side of the aisle, the agency side of the aisle, you could look at that as like the big bad brother or someone who's just trying to press more laws and regulations. But in reality, I like to think of it as a good thing, right? Because you and I and everyone else out there, we are consumers and we're dealing with these financial institutions in more ways than we probably even realize. So ultimately, it is at least aiming to arm consumers with some protections when something is done illegally or unrightfully or against your wishes. You now have a big government bureau to kind of help protect you. And eventually they got into some rulemaking. It took several years to kind of go through a process to come out with some new guidelines. And that was known as Regulation F, which came into effect in November of 2021. So only about 4 years in the past that a whole new set of guidelines came out. And on one side, these agencies and anyone involved in collections was, hey, you got to start to abide by these laws. And, we had almost all of 2021 to prepare for it. But what that did was put real goalposts and parameters around things such as in the past, there was no definition of how frequently I could call you, Sarah. How many times a day or how many times in a span of time could you be called? Now that kind of puts some guidelines in there. It's kind of known as the rule of 7 and 7, where it says an agency by law can reach out to their consumer target 7 times in a rolling 7-day period. So great. Agencies are actually happy to hear that. There's no reason for me to call you 21 times in 7 days, right? You're kind of telling me, hey, I don't really want to talk to you, right? So I could see why that would be considered harassment. But they put in these guidelines that helped agencies to kind of understand the playing field, right? And there are other things that fell in line with that, such as if the consumer says, this is a time and place of inconvenience for me, please do not call me between 7 a.m. and which would be illegal anyways, between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. because I'm at work. Then the agency is going to need to have tools and methodology to make sure that that specific person's not being called in that time frame. So when you reference where does Interprose or other solution providers and other software come into play, that would be a major arena because on one hand, any business operating knows with, of course, human involvement, the likelihood of human error is an inevitability. It's not if, but when a human makes an error, whether intentionally or unintentionally, it's going to happen. The collection agency perspective, that means lawsuits. We're a very litigious country and there's lots of hungry consumer attorneys out there looking for any single reason to press a very easily won lawsuit against an agency. Another law that's long been on the books is you can't contact someone prior to 8 a.m. their local time or after 9 p.m. their local time. And before software kind of presented those tools to prevent calls from physically leaving the office at 7:58 a.m. or 9:02 p.m., oftentimes you have human oversight and just miss that, right? Or this person doesn't want me to call them between a certain time frame. You'd be completely relying on humans to see that in the system notes, to see the times and whatnot. And of course, that led to a lot of problems. So where the software solutions come in is providing those built-in tool sets that supplement or go beyond what human error is going to inevitably do. So if it's 9:02 p.m. and I'm not paying attention to the clock and I try to call someone on the East Coast, that phone is not going to make that connection because the software system is going to see that it's past that time zone. Or if we have designated into that collection software in a time or a place of inconvenience, it's not going to let that call go out. Or if you're telling us, do not email me anymore, there should be something in that software that can be marked off that physically does not allow an email or text message to go out to you, right? Whether you tell me verbally or you're clicking on the unsubscribe links in the email or replying stop to a text message, whatever that case is, it's making sure that we are not going to try that methodology again because you clearly told us that's not how you want to be communicated with. Same thing with that 7 and 7 rule. That's very hard to keep track of. If you're just doing that manually or visually working in a system, you're going to mess that up. You're going to make a mistake. So now the software system should be able to track the number of outbound contacts you've attempted in a rolling 7-day period and present that to you and have automated workflows go into how often these accounts are worked. When that regulation F came out in November 2021, as an example, our company Interprose, one of the things we do as a customer benefit of ours is we have a monthly release cycle. So every month we're pushing out, new functions and capabilities, AI integrations these days and all that fun stuff. And when Regulation F came out, instead of having a monthly release, we had like 8 deployments in 2.5 months to make sure all these new compliance rules and laws and tools and features were meeting our customers' needs. And this would be everybody across the board in this industry was scrambling to make sure that by November 2021, your systems were in place and ready to handle these new regulations. And it's a moving target, right? It's not every day the federal government is coming out with new guidelines. These take time, they take years, but break it down to 50 separate states. That is a constant. There's constantly new rules or regulations. They often say if California or New York are pressing for new regulation, it's only a matter of time before other states start to adopt those as well. And that's also very politically motivated is who's running those individual states and what did they run on and what did their constituents want? And do we want stronger regulations? And it's the never ending moving target. So it keeps people employed to a degree and it keeps it fun for some and keeps it challenging for all of us.
So that's pretty crazy. Didn't pass till 2021, which is fairly recent. So
Yeah.
prior to that, there weren't any rules or regulations around the number of times you could contact and all of these items that you discussed.
Very subjective. And in some states had some terminology put in there. But it was really like, as an example, the agency I worked at, they kind of came up with, and it was more like a best practice that was discussed and communicated throughout the industry, and people would kind of self adopt it where we would just make a consideration. We will not try this person more than 3 times in a day, as an example. Maybe a call them in the morning, send an email in the afternoon, things like that. What did we feel was something that we could defend and putting ourselves in the other side of the aisle, putting yourself in those shoes, what would seem egregious to us? So it was a lot of different agencies coming up with their own reasonable processes without having a guideline of a law that said this is black and this is white. So then you get the gray area, right? You're kind of operating in the gray area. You're trying to do well. You're trying to do the right thing. You're also trying to recover your owed funds. But how do we do it without upsetting the consumer or making it seem like we're being overly aggressive when just want to have a conversation?
Yeah. So I'm assuming then, based on what you've shared, that a benefit of having a software like Interprose is almost a peace of mind for your clients that you guys will stay up to date on any changing rules and regulations and that you guys will
Yeah.
implement those. Because I know just from my own past, keeping up with rules and regulations and implementing that on the user's end is a task in itself. So
Yeah.
I would imagine that that would be a great selling point that you guys ensure that they're always in compliance. Would that be fair to
Yeah. Absolutely. So think about any general software company out there, right? You have a big team of your developers, right? We'll call them the smart people in the room. I'm happy to tell them that they're smart. You guys are smart. And how in tuned are those folks at the regulations and the laws? How entrenched are they in any specific industry? In our world, and even in our company, the developers, they didn't come from per se an agency background like myself. So us on the sales side, one of the things we do is we are entrenched in the industry and the different trade associations. And that is why we are going to these conferences and conventions. It's yes, of course, we're there to sell and to network, but at the same time, we have to be educated and we have to keep up with the moving targets that are constantly going on out there. So it's kind of like there's an arm of the company that has to be well informed on all these upcoming changes and the real changes or the potential ones. So you can kind of get ahead of that and you kind of inform down the line to the development team. They're just tell me what to make, right? They're like, I'm not entrenched in the industry. I make the walls move. I can make the software do anything you want it to do. essentially. Just tell me what you wanted to do. So all of these organizations and companies in our space, I'm sure with everywhere else out there, is you have to have people who are very much well informed. So on our sales side, we're the ones that speak with the operators and the companies and agencies and align with the trade associations. And it's part of our job to understand what's coming down the pipe. So we're not being overly reactive to it, but you can start to build tools out to be proactive, which of course is going to benefit your current customers. They're going to expect that, and it's going to attract your new customers.
So every market has competitors and a lot of players out there trying to solve the same problem or offer the same solution. So can you share what makes Interprose stand apart and how do you communicate that difference to someone who's evaluating multiple platforms?
Competition's good for everybody, right? And we're in a very niche space with a very niche product, and it's not something that needs to be mass marketed out there, right? Most people in the industry know who the players are. I hope I'm not wrong on this number, but over the years, the actual number of debt collection agencies in the U.S. is continuously going down. I want to say there's maybe in the range of 1,500 agencies that are aligned with one of the major trade associations itself, right? So we're not talking about tens of thousands of potential target customers, right? And there's plenty of other competitors in this space, and there's new ones that are coming on board recently, and there's some that you would refer to as legacy that have been around since like the 80s. So as far as, separations or differences, of course there's going to be a lot of similarities, but it's those small differences that make the walls move for us in sales. So one of the big things that we hear from the prospective customers that come and knock on our door is they've been on a legacy platform for decades and it's just not keeping up anymore. It's not modernizing fast enough. Some of the software and the tech stack behind it is becoming deprecated. So what we love to offer to our customers, I think is one of the major benefits is that monthly release cycle where potentially on the other side of the aisle, those things aren't being done, but once a year, twice a year, maybe only on an as needed basis, right? And that's not keeping up with what the agency or that business is needing. So that is one of the major selling points, at least from our side of that aisle, is it's a perpetually improving piece of software. So if you like what it is today and it meets all your needs today, you rest assured knowing that each month it's going to get better and better and better and better as we keep up and keep ahead of the general industry and competition to a degree.
Great. So now shifting gears a bit, I want to talk about growth. And I feel like this is a good segue based on kind of what you were just talking about here. And so you're responsible for helping expand the footprint here in North America. And so when you think about growth at Interpros over the next year, what are the main levers that you're focused on pulling? Whether, it's going to these events and building stronger relationships or, refining your sales process. What's kind of your focus really in order to achieve more growth?
Yeah. So with software, there's lots of products out there that if I was the buying agency, the company in need of that solution, and think about any general business whatsoever, there's some pieces of software that you can implement and onboard very quickly, right? There's some pieces of software that are very universal across different business types. As an example, we use HubSpot for our sales CRM, right? To capture all our notes and do a lot of outreach to our prospective customers. A very similar product to HubSpot would be Salesforce, right? You don't need to be any one specific company to need that product. That's very broad ranging of who might use that product versus who needs a piece of collection software. And again, going back to our very niche kind of target audience there, and there's a very finite number of operations that might even need this product. What we would need to do there is think about over the years, you get your foot in the door with very small operations, very small businesses, and you learn how to support a small company. It could be 5 people, 10 people, 15 people. And well, that brings in a little bit of revenue for you, of course. But to your question, how does that scale and how does that grow? Well, even as of recently, we're experiencing a lot of prospective customers coming our way that are much larger businesses and entities. It could be municipalities, larger banking and financial institutions, not just your standard mom and pop agency down the road that has 10 to 20 people at it. So we are really experiencing the growth from the scale of the operations looking to utilize our software. But going back to my point of some software you can onboard as a solution within a week, a couple weeks, a month or so. You get in there, you do a little configuration, and software is ready to go because it's kind of universally used. On the debt collection software side, I wish that was the case. It is a lengthy time frame. It's not something I say happily. It's a reality. As an example, going back to my days in the agency side, I sat down to collect my first file in 2010. We were using a very, very old piece of software. I sat down, I was like, I can't believe this is the software you guys are using. It looks like it's from the 80s. And I was told day one, "Oh, I heard we're getting this new software platform and it's going to be shiny and new and all these new cool tools and stuff." That was in 2010. We did not go live on that software until 2015. Now, that is not standard. It is not a standard time frame for 5 years. We were on a platform for like 20 some years, and you needed to take all that data and all those workflows and processes and replicate it and improve it in the new platform. From my understanding, there's a lot of headaches and a lot of hangups and potential foul points, and it took an extremely long time to make that implementation happen. On our side, we might tell a prospective customer, this could take 6 months. It could take 5 months. It could take a year to implement this software, right? So regardless of what we can digest in a pipeline or with prospective customers, there's always that lingering mapping and planning of how to get that customer implemented and having the personnel and the implementation teams to support that. So for us to continue to grow, and I think I'm speaking pretty universally for anyone in this space, is how can we support more implementations? How can we make them go quicker? How can we make them go smoother? So I think that's the biggest challenge today is getting people on board. If you're excited about a new process today, we're going to get this new tool. It's going to help us make more money, make everyone's lives easier, but you're not going to have it for a couple of months, or I should say a handful of months. That kind of slows down the excitement a little bit. So in getting someone through those phases of implementation, you have to keep that momentum going, and you got to get them in and out and get them live and get them in a stable position so you can bring in that next customer. So that's part of a growth strategy and a pain point, but one of that we're of course tackling, and it's exciting because the company's growing and we're able to meet the needs of bigger and bigger customers.
So, with that in mind, it is somewhat unique for your role on the sales side and trying to attract those prospects. Are you having to kind of juggle then or really look at your pipeline and determine how many prospects you actually want to get across the line during a certain amount of time to then allow that implementation team or back office team to actually get them up and running. Obviously, there must be some bandwidth restrictions there, especially
Mhm.
with that long of an implementation. So, are you having to think about that when you go through your pipeline and kind of map that out?
Yeah, one of the first things you get a feeling for is when are you going to be ready to move? What are your goals to be live? Sometimes you have folks that need to be live by a certain time based on a new client they acquired or new ownership demands, whatever that case might be. But looking at that pipeline is a perpetual daily thing to see when you can map things out. And on that same vein, you look at our typical sales cycle, right? If you were to reach out to me today, like Sarah, you own a collection agency, you're on old software, you need to modernize and you need to kick some tires. Well, first of all, I would hope or expect that you look at multiple products, right? I would expect anyone talking to us to be looking at the competition out there. In fact, I'd want you to. I want you to know what's available, and I want you to make a very well informed and excited decision. But from a sales cycle side, it could be on the short end, maybe 3 months, 2 to 3 months on like the fastest side. But also it could be 5, 6 years, right? When I came on 2 years ago, And I'm starting to get into our CRM and look at some old notes. And I had an outreach from somebody, and I'd say, "Oh, look, I've got a record of you going back from the first time you reached out to us 5 years ago." Right. So oftentimes you speak with people today who are getting informed about what their options are, but they might not even be ready to move for 6 months, or today they're just not sure. But 6 months from now, all of a sudden they have an immediate need. So one of the first things that we try to understand is your time frames. When are you looking to start your project? When are you prepared to start it? And what are your goals or objectives to be live and fully operational on the new software? And from there, of course, there's a lot of mapping and planning that goes into that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, what marketing or outreach strategies are working best for you today to connect with decision makers in this space?
Yeah. And being that it is such a unique and niche kind of market, where most people involved know most people involved, and the the vendors and the solution providers all do a really good job at supporting the industry in general. As far as, like, for example, cold calling or cold emailing is certainly a tactic you could deploy. We personally don't do a whole lot of that, because those folks who know they need a new piece of software, they know. And for us to kind of blindly outreach to them might not be our best use of time. Our best use of outreach and sales tactics is to be a constant presence at industry events, the trade shows, the conventions, the online webinars, to showcase that we're here. We've been here. We're gonna keep being here, and you're going to have a lot of word of mouth from that as well. Most people don't just come to you cold. They're going to reach out to their network and, "Hey, who are you using? Who did you hear is good?" And the reality of it is, as well, is we would receive a lot more inbound than we do from outbound in our sales efforts. I look at the majority of our outbound sales efforts in being at the convention and trade shows. This coming Sunday, I'm flying to Atlantic City for a trade show. A week after that, I'll be in Niagara Falls, Ontario. So I'm throughout the year going to these shows. And I think this brings up a good point, going back to my agency days, which is how I met the folks at Interprose to begin with. So I'm working at the agency. I'm on a director level. I'm not quite a decision maker, more of an influencer. And I'd go to these conventions as a content provider. I'd do sessions and speaking engagements. Excuse me. In that time frame there, I'd have vendors come up to me, right? They'd say, "Oh, that's that guy from that big agency, and we need to use him to get to the ownership because we want to sell them our product and our solutions," right? So I was hit up straight away, which on one side was really nice because people want to take you to dinner, and they want to give you their prizes and things like that. But I'd have folks coming to me saying, "Hey, Greg, get your boss man on the phone. Tell him to use our products and our services." And after my first few shows, I was very reluctant to just run home and say, "Hey guys, I learned this brand new thing and you got to use this product. You got to check these guys out." I was careful about what I put my name behind. So as I went to the second show, the third show, the fourth show, right? I see the same person I saw 4 months ago, but they're with a different company now. They're selling a different product. And now you're trying to sell me a different product under a different company. For me, that was a timeout, timeout. You just reset your clock for me. I kind of made up this rule in my mind that said, I kind of have to see you at 3 or 4 shows consistently with the same company representing the same product and seeing that your product is improving before I ever would entertain bringing you and your company to my company ownership. So I'm protecting myself in addition to the company, right? And I see that now, where, going to those shows, I kept seeing Interpros show up. I kept seeing the guy who's now my boss. I kept seeing him there every single show and became friends with him. And you start to trust those folks that you see who keep showing up, who are committed to that industry and those solutions. And so part of our major tactic is to do exactly that. Keep showing up, keep networking with people. There's sales that I've had from people I met a year and a half ago at one of my first shows on the vendor side. And you see them at 4 more shows, and to them, you're there. You're not going anywhere. You're a presence and you build that trust. And that's where they start the exploration process. And for me, it was no different. If I'm going to onboard your product, or if my company is going to give you money, then I need to know that you're in it for the long run and that we can build a real relationship. It's not just a sales interaction.
So, then on your side of the table, as someone driving sales and meeting and going to these events and building those relationships, What would you say the toughest part is about breaking through with your message and actually taking it to that next step? Obviously, you're forming, a more personal relationship, you're showing up, but how do you take it to that next step? And what's the hardest part about that?
It is the fact that most people know a software transition of this scale is not an overnight process. It's going to involve getting their team into a lengthy process, right? Like I kind of mentioned a couple minutes ago, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a heavy lift. So how do you see the benefit to that heavy lift? And of course, we get into the return on investment, where perhaps you might be spending a little bit more on just the software side, but this is where you'll save more money and you'll make more money. One of the common problems we see today are folks that might be using an older platform that is obviously limited in their capabilities. And because of that, they need to also utilize a handful of other solutions or other vendors. Like, I need a specific telephone provider. I need a letter provider. I need someone who does my text messages. I need someone who handles my documentation. I need someone who can drive my text messages, right? And that list goes on and on and on and on and on. So oftentimes you're talking to folks who have a whole roster of other vendors that they're pretty much forced to use because the software platform is pretty much a system of record and that's it. So the solutions that are excelling today are able to incorporate those tools natively into their platform. So we can speak to the operators and say, hey, you're using 5, 6, 7 different vendors in addition to your software, which of course all takes another invoice, another line item, another relationship, another support team, another point that could go wrong. And how much of those services can be put into a modern platform where I don't need an outside telephony provider, or I don't need an outside text messaging provider or a document storage provider. And that's when you say, hey, maybe our software costs a little bit more than the ones you're using today, but it's going to come inclusive with those features, which will help you eliminate things on the other side of the aisle for you. So getting over the hump of it's a project, it's an undertaking, and here's truly where your ROI is going to see massive improvements. And once those lights kind of go off, they tend to get excited about it and things move forward.
So now shifting kind of away from the prospects and the challenges of the sales, thinking about your role and your team's mission, what's one internal challenge at Interprose that you're working to overcome right now? And why does solving it matter to you and your team?
Yeah, like any company, we are pushing for growth. We are definitely experiencing growth. So 2 years ago, I was the newest person onboarded, of course, and in that 2 year time frame, I think we've added in 6 new people. Which, if you were to go back 4 or 5 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. There wasn't necessarily a need for that. So as we see the potential to grow more customers and larger customers, it takes more people to do that work. So all of our departments are growing and you got to get ahead of that, right? You want to be proactive in that onboarding, development side, the implementation teams, the customer support side, and people don't get trained overnight, right? This is a large, heavy piece of software, lots of nooks and crannies. It's changing to a degree every month. And if I hire you today, when will you be ready to lead an implementation team? When will you be able to get your hands into the development side of things, right? That doesn't happen overnight. Regardless of what your prior experience was, now you got to learn this software, how to support it, how to code it, and you need to get ahead of that growth. So when that next customer comes along ready to sign on, you have the support on your employee side that can push those forward. So that's one of our big focuses now, is growing in personnel so we can provide more services to more people.
Great. And so now looking ahead at the next year or 12 months, if you had to describe kind of what success to you would look like, looking back, what would that be and what would it look like for you?
Well, potentially another sales guy or gal to come along with me and go to the shows, but I wouldn't say that's the potential pain point for us. I'd say success for us would be bringing in the opportunities to implement more and more folks congruently so we can get more folks onboarded quicker, and get them up and running and making that ROI that we know is going to happen. We just want that to happen sooner. So for us, I think success a year from now is the ability to multiply the number of customers we can do implementations on at any one point in time.
Great. And before we wrap, I just want to leave with an advice from you. So, what
Okay.
advice would you give to other leaders in collections and credit who are navigating, the compliance, technology, and growth right now?
Yes. So I'm going to go back to the conference scene or the collaboration side, whether that's with webinars or online events, where I highly encourage those folks to get your internal people involved and lift them up. One of the biggest career benefits that I was afforded was an opportunity to get outside those walls and meet people within the industry. And again, that could be online with access to webinars or classes, or actually making a trip to another city to meet people face to face. But starting internally with your folks that you know are either at or blooming into a potential future leadership role is get them exposed to the industry in whole. You want them to be well versed and knowledgeable on things outside your walls that'll help them make better decisions for your organization going into the future. Getting out there to know who the other players are. And I can speak wholeheartedly for the folks in this industry that I've come to learn over the last 15 years. There's a lot of really good people, a lot of good companies, a lot of solution providers out there. I'm really not just trying to put a pinpoint on Interprose. There's a lot of great folks out there who are doing awesome things to support your business. And look for those trusted faces and names. Look for those that have been out there, and just start that conversation and get some of your internal people involved. So all of these decision points aren't being overburdened on you in the leadership ownership side, where your staff is empowered to network with folks, learn more about what's outside your walls, and learn what kind of solutions are out there to help drive your business forward. I think is a huge benefit to the company in itself and that personnel inside your walls that you want to uplift and give a real career path to.
It's great advice. And for anyone who wants to learn more about Interpros or connect with you, where is the best place?
Well, I think our website's pretty cool and real simple. Interprose.com, Interprose.com. I think a few times I put it in a Google search and it keeps wanting to send me to enterprise rental car, but interprose.com, all of our contact links, lots of great resources on our product. And it just starts with the conversation. We know anyone in the space. We know these decisions are not made overnight. We are here to walk that path with you, no matter how long that takes. It could take 5 years. It could take 3 months. Whatever that case is, it's just about understanding your business, what your needs and goals are, you understanding what the solution provider can do for you, and you make a really well-informed decision.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Mo's Market Pulse. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave us a comment, and join us again to hear more insights from future leaders. And thank you, Greg, for joining me today and sharing all of your insights.